The demon lord smiled when I told him I would never choose him. Not a cruel smile. That would have been easier. Kael looked at me with the calm patience of a man listening to someone argue with the sunrise. Between us, the bond burned warm beneath my skin, a steady pulse that answered his presence whether I wanted it to or not. He felt it too. I knew because his eyes dropped for half a second to my wrist, then returned to my face. "You're angry," he said. "I'm not angry. You will be, for a while." I stared at him. "That isn't what I said." Kael stood on the other side of the long table, one hand resting against its dark edge. He had enough power to make entire rooms seem arranged around him, but he wasn't threatening me. He didn't need to. That was part of the problem. He was so certain. "You said you won't choose me," he replied. "Yes. And I heard you. Then stop looking at me like I said something temporary." His expression barely changed. "Because it is." The bond gave another slow pulse. Warm. Familiar. Infuriating. I hated that my body could recognize him while my mind was trying to draw a line he refused to see. Kael came around the table, not rushing, not cornering me. He stopped several feet away, close enough for the bond to sharpen, far enough that I could still breathe without feeling crowded. "You feel it," he said. "That has never been the argument." For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not doubt. Interest. As if I had finally said something worth examining. "Then what is the argument?" "You think because this exists." I touched 2 fingers to the place on my wrist where the bond seemed strongest. "The rest has already been decided." Kael's gaze followed the movement. "Hasn't it?" "No." The word came out harder than I intended. I lowered my hand. "A bond can connect us. It can pull, hurt, and make me aware of you from across a room. None of that means I chose you." Silence settled between us. Kael did not look offended. Somehow, that made it worse. I had spent days preparing for anger, command, even contempt. I knew how to fight those things. Certainty was harder. Certainty could turn anything I did into evidence for a conclusion I had never agreed to. "You think I'm forcing you," he said. "I think you've already decided what my answer will be. Because I know what the bond is. You know what it does." I held his eyes. "You don't get to decide what it means for me." That landed. Not like a wound, exactly. More like a stone dropped into still water. His attention sharpened. The room felt smaller, though he had not moved. "And if, one day, you come to me willingly?" he asked. There it was. Not if I chose him. When I came to my senses, I felt a strange pressure behind my ribs. Not fear, not attraction, but the exhaustion of being understood in every detail except the one that mattered most. "Then it will matter because I was allowed not to." Kael's brow tightened. "You speak as though I would stop you. You don't have to lock a door to make someone feel trapped." He went still. For a second, I thought I had finally reached him. Then his gaze softened, almost unbearably. "Elias." The way he said my name made the bond flare hotter. His eyes dropped to my wrist, and I saw reassurance soften his face. I pulled my hand back. "Don't turn that into proof." Kael frowned. "You felt the bond." My body reacted. "That is not a decision." Kael took one slow step back. For the first time since the conversation began, the pressure between us eased. Relief came too quickly, and I hated that too. Because relief was softness. Softness could be mistaken. I watched his face carefully. "Say it," I told him. "Say what?" "Say that if I never choose you, the bond does not make me wrong." That was the first moment his certainty cracked. Not enough to break, but enough that I finally saw what held it together. His eyes narrowed slightly. His answer took too long. "You will choose me." The words were quiet, almost gentle. "That isn't an answer. It is the only answer that makes sense." I stared at him. "To you." Kael looked away first, toward the tall windows behind me, toward the fading light beyond the glass. His profile was composed again. Untouchable. "You are asking me to believe the bond brought us together for no reason." "No. I'm asking you to believe that reason isn't the same thing as permission." His eyes returned to mine. "The bond already chose for us." There it was. Simple. Absolute. And suddenly, I understood the real problem. Kael wasn't refusing to hear me. He had heard every word. He knew I was saying no. He knew I meant it. He simply believed my no belonged to the present, while the bond belonged to the future. That sooner or later, feeling would become wanting, wanting would become surrender, and surrender would become proof that he had been right all along. I stepped back, putting more distance between us. The bond stretched warm beneath my skin, refusing to disappear, just because I wanted space. Then you and the bond can wait, I said. But neither of you gets to speak for me. Kael did not stop me. He didn't call me back. He only watched as I turned toward the door, and for one dangerous second, I almost mistook that silence for understanding. Then he spoke. Take all the time you need, Elias. My hand stopped on the door. His voice held no threat, no anger, only patience. I looked back. Kael's expression was calm again, as if the future were a fact already written and I was simply taking the long way toward it. That was when I realized I had been arguing the wrong question. I had thought I needed to make the demon lord understand that I could say no. He already understood. What I needed to find out was why a man powerful enough to accept almost any truth in the world could not accept the possibility that one day, with the bond still burning between us, I might still choose to walk away. I stopped giving Kael anything he could mistake for agreement. That was the consequence of our conversation, though I don't think he understood it at first. The next morning, when he asked whether I wanted breakfast brought to the West Terrace, I said I would eat alone. When he offered to walk with me through the lower gardens, I told him I preferred the quiet. When he paused beside me near the library windows and asked if the bond had kept me awake, I answered only, I'm fine. None of those things were punishments. At least, I told myself they weren't. I was simply removing ambiguity. If Kael could look at a pulse beneath my skin and call it evidence of a future I had never agreed to, then I would give him as little evidence as possible. For 2 days, it worked. Kael did not press closer or repeat that patient certainty. He took my request for distance literally, and I told myself I was relieved. Yet I still noticed when his footsteps stopped outside a room without entering, when the bond warmed before I saw him, and when the chair across from me stayed empty at meals. I hated that I noticed it all. On the third evening, the mistake happened because I forgot to be careful. Kael had spent most of the day away from the northern wing, handling whatever demanded the attention of a demon lord. I didn't ask. That was another rule I had made for myself. Curiosity could become intimacy far too easily. By dusk, I was alone in the reading room with a book open in my lap and the fire sinking low. When the bond suddenly tightened beneath my ribs, I knew he had returned before the doors opened. Kael stepped inside, removed his gloves, and stopped when he saw me. He looked tired, the control in his shoulders heavier than usual. You're back late, I said. The words escaped before I could measure them. His attention sharpened instantly. I wished I could pull the sentence back. You noticed. You walked through the door. That isn't what I meant. I closed the book. Don't start. I haven't said anything. He came no closer, but something in his face had changed. That quiet reassurance from the night before was returning. I could see it happening. Elias, he said, almost gently, you felt when I returned. The bond felt when you returned. And you asked where I had been. I said you were late. Because you noticed I was gone. There it was again. The invisible hand reaching into something I had chosen and relabeling it before I could stop him. I stood. This is exactly what I meant. Kael's expression tightened. You asked if I was late. I answered. No. You turned it into proof. Proof of what? That I'm moving toward you. He was silent. That silence was answer enough. My frustration came faster because I knew he had heard me before. I can notice that you're tired. I can care whether you've eaten. I can wonder where you were. None of those things are promises. Kael held my gaze. Why are you so afraid of what they might become? I'm not afraid of what they might become. Then why do you treat every feeling as if it threatens you? I stared at him. The bond pulsed once between us, warm and steady. Because you keep turning feelings into decisions. His jaw shifted. I don't. You just did. I said you noticed me. And you smiled like it proved you were right. That finally stopped him. The fire cracked behind me. For once, Kael did not answer immediately. I saw something move through his expression, confusion first, then the faintest edge of irritation, not at me exactly, but at the fact that my interpretation did not match his own. You think I am taking something from you when I acknowledge what already exists, he said. Yes. His gaze hardened slightly. I cannot pretend the bond is meaningless to make you comfortable. I never asked you to. Then what do you want from me? The answer came easily. Part of me had been building it for 3 days. I want you to stop treating every voluntary thing I give you as evidence that someday I'll give you everything. The words settled between us. Kael's eyes moved to the book I had abandoned, then to the chair where I had been sitting, then back to me. So if you ask whether I've eaten, he said slowly, I should assume it means nothing? No, I shook my head. You should assume it means exactly what it means. I cared whether you ate. That's all you know. And if you miss me? The bond seemed suddenly too warm. Then you know I missed you. Nothing more. Nothing more unless I say so. His mouth tightened. I could tell he disliked the answer. But this time he did not argue that the bond knew better than I did. He simply stood there, absorbing a rule he had never imagined needing. For one brief second, I thought perhaps that was enough. Then he glanced at the chair beside mine. May I sit? The question startled me because Kael had never asked permission for something so ordinary. I hesitated, then nodded. For a while, he sat without smiling or treating my answer like progress. We stayed there while the fire burned lower, saying almost nothing. And against my better judgment, some of the tension left my shoulders. That was my second mistake. When I finally stood to leave, Kael looked up at me and said, "Thank you for staying." His voice was soft enough that the words slipped past my defenses. "You look like you needed someone here," I said. Warmth entered his face, not triumph, something gentler, and I caught it before he could say more. "Elias, don't." The warmth vanished. I stepped back. "Please, don't make it into more than I gave." Kael went still. I watched understanding reach him in pieces. The evening, my concern, and my staying had all been voluntary. Because he had spent so long treating voluntary steps as evidence of the same inevitable ending, I no longer trusted him with even the smallest ones. That realization changed both of us. I had thought distance would protect my choices. Instead, I was learning the cost of being constantly misread. Eventually, you stopped offering anything that could be misunderstood. I left him beside the dying fire knowing that until Kael learned the difference between affection and surrender, I would have to guard not only my answer, but every kindness he might mistake for it. For the next 2 days, Kael stopped asking me to stay. That should have made everything easier. Instead, it made me notice exactly what he had changed. He no longer lingered when I entered a room. He did not comment when the bond warmed between us. If I asked him a question, he answered only the question I had actually asked. No knowing smile. No quiet prediction about where my feelings would lead. It was what I had wanted, and somehow that made me more suspicious than before. I kept waiting for the old certainty to return. It didn't. The clearest proof came at dinner on the second night. Kael sat at the far end of the table beside an untouched plate. I tried not to notice, failed, and finally asked, "Are you going to eat that?" He looked at the plate. Eventually. That usually means no. His eyes lifted to mine, and I braced for the old smile, the look that would turn my concern into evidence. It never came. "You're right," he said. "I haven't been hungry." He picked up his fork. Nothing more. No interpretation. No claim. I was so prepared to defend the meaning of my concern that his restraint left me off balance. "You're not going to say anything?" I asked. "About you noticing?" Understanding crossed his face. "You asked me not to make your kindness mean more than you intended. So I won't." I should have felt victorious. Instead, something inside me loosened in a way I hadn't authorized. It would have been easier if he had fought me. If Kael had mocked the boundary, I could have hardened myself against him. But he was trying. Not perfectly. Not enough to erase anything that had happened. Still trying. Later, I found him alone near the tall windows outside the reading room. I almost walked past. Then I noticed he was holding the book I had left beside the fire 2 nights earlier. He saw me and extended it without stepping closer. "You forgot this." I took it. Our fingers nearly touched. The bond reacted instantly, a warm current moving up my arm. I pulled my hand back on reflex. Kael did the same. Not because the bond had startled him. Because he had seen me retreat. He gave me space before I had to ask for it. That stopped me. "You don't have to act like I'm afraid of you," I said. His expression changed slightly. "I don't think you're afraid of me." "Then why are you being so careful?" He considered the question. "Because you told me what I was doing made you guard every kindness." My grip tightened around the book. He continued before I could answer. "I don't want that." There was no performance in his voice. No dramatic apology. Somehow, the restraint made the words harder to dismiss. "Why?" I asked. Kael's eyes held mine. "Because if you have to measure every word around me, then I never know which parts of you are real." My first reaction was almost anger. "You're the reason I started measuring them." "I know." The answer landed harder than a defense would have. I searched his face for the familiar certainty, for some hidden satisfaction that this conversation itself meant progress. There was none. "And what happens?" I asked slowly. If the real parts still don't choose you. His jaw tightened. There. A reaction. Not possession. Not anger. Something quieter. Then they don't. But the words cost him. I could hear it. You don't believe that yet. Kael looked away. No, it was the most honest thing he had said to me. He did not pretend he had changed overnight. He did not tell me he suddenly understood everything. He simply admitted the limit of what he could accept. For reasons I couldn't explain, that honesty made the space between us feel less dangerous than his confidence ever had. I looked down at the book in my hands. Thank you for bringing this back. You're welcome. I turned to leave. Elias. I stopped. Kael remained exactly where he was. I'm not going to ask you what that meant. A laugh almost escaped me. Not because it was funny. Because something in my chest had finally unclenched. Good. I walked away before either of us could ruin it. But that night, lying awake with the bond warm and quiet beneath my skin, I could no longer tell myself the easiest version of Kael's story. A man interested only in possession would have ignored my boundary. Kael had listened, and when listening cost him the reassurance he wanted, he had still tried. That did not make him safe. It did not make him right. It certainly did not make me his. But it changed the question I had been asking. I already knew what I was refusing. The idea that a bond could choose my future for me. What I no longer knew was what Kael truly wanted from that future. Because if possession was all he wanted, my freedom would only frustrate him. But if he wanted something else, something he could never command, then his certainty about our bond might not have come from strength at all. After that night, Kael stopped giving me reasons to doubt that he was trying. The problem was that trying made everything harder. A week earlier, I had known exactly how to protect myself from him. I kept my distance. I questioned every kindness. I treated the bond like a door I had to keep locked from the inside. But now Kael had begun doing something I had not prepared for. He was leaving the door alone. He asked before joining me. He stopped reading meaning into every glance. When the bond stirred between us, he let the feeling exist without naming it for me. And because he stopped reaching, I stopped pulling away quite so quickly. That was how I found myself sitting across from him one evening with 2 cups of tea cooling between us, talking about nothing important. There was no argument, no challenge, no demand hidden beneath the conversation. I had chosen to stay after dinner because I wanted to finish something I had been telling him, and Kael had simply listened. I realized how dangerous that felt only when I laughed. It was a small laugh, barely more than breath, but Kael went still. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My hand left the table. I waited for him to smile, to say something about the bond, to tell me this was where we had always been heading. Instead, Kael lowered his eyes to his tea. You can laugh without regretting it, he said. I stared at him. I wasn't regretting it. You were preparing to. I almost denied it. Then I realized he was right. Old habits. Mine caused them. The answer came without defensiveness. I looked down at my cup. Some of them. Kael nodded once. He did not ask what the others were. That restraint had become familiar enough now that I no longer noticed every time he practiced it. Maybe that was why what happened next caught both of us off guard. I like this, I said. Kael looked up. I could have stopped there. I probably should have. But the last few days had taught me that silence could become its own kind of cage. Tonight, I clarified. I like being here with you. For 1 second, Kael did nothing. Then something opened in his expression. Hope. It was so unguarded that I almost looked away. The bond warmed between us, fuller than before, as if it had been waiting for permission to breathe. Kael's fingers tightened slightly around his cup. Elias. My stomach dropped. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because I knew that tone. The old certainty had not returned exactly, but it had moved. It was closer to the surface. Don't, I said softly. Kael stopped. I haven't said anything. I know. He watched me. Then what are you afraid I'm going to say? The honest answer hurt more than I expected. That this means I'm getting closer to the answer you want. Kael was silent. That silence lasted too long. I felt the warmth in the bond become unbearable, not because it was stronger, but because suddenly I knew he had hoped for exactly that. Doesn't it? He asked. The question was careful, not a claim. That almost made it worse. I forced myself not to retreat. No, the hope in his face faltered. You chose to stay? You enjoyed being with me. Yes. I kept my hands around my cup. And I'm not taking any of that back. But choosing one evening with you is not choosing my life with you. Kael leaned back slightly, genuinely confused rather than dismissive. You can feel all of this and still leave? Yes. Something shifted in him. The look of someone watching a rule he had trusted fail in real time. You can feel all of this, he said quietly, and still leave. There was the question neither of us had asked yet. I took a breath. Yes. The word seemed to empty the room. Kael looked away. For the first time since I had known him, his silence did not feel like power. It felt like something had been taken from him. Not me. Something less visible. An assumption. I thought he stopped. I waited, but he did not finish. What? His jaw tightened. Nothing. Kael. He looked back at me. There was no certainty left in his face now. Only a kind of stunned calculation, as if he were rebuilding something from pieces that no longer fit together. I thought if you stopped fighting the bond, he said slowly, you would stop fighting me. I'm not fighting the bond. I know that now. The words landed between us with more weight than any argument we had ever had. I felt a strange ache behind my ribs. Then what are you fighting? He asked. I shook my head. I'm not fighting you either. That seemed to hurt him more. Then why won't you choose me? He already knew my old arguments. Repeating them would not change what had just happened, so I gave him the only answer left. Because caring about you doesn't make the choice automatic. Kael stared at me. The bond remained warm between us. That was the cruelest part. Nothing supernatural weakened. Nothing broke. The connection stayed exactly where it had always been, even as the meaning he had built around it began to fall apart. I see, he said. But he didn't. Not yet. What he saw was that his certainty had failed. What neither of us understood was why that failure frightened him so much. I stood, not because I wanted to run, but because staying suddenly felt too intimate for what had just been exposed. Kael did not stop me. He did not ask me to reconsider. He only remained at the table, staring at the space where my hands had been around the cup. At the door, I looked back. For once, he wasn't watching me leave. He was looking down at the bond mark on his own wrist as if it had given him an answer his entire life. And for the first time, he no longer trusted the question it was supposed to solve. I had spent so long believing Kael's certainty came from power. But watching him sit there, stripped of that certainty by nothing more dramatic than the fact that I could care for him and still say no, I began to wonder if I had misunderstood something fundamental. Maybe the thing Kael was protecting was not his control over me. Maybe it was whatever remained of him when control could no longer guarantee that I would stay. Kael did not come to dinner the next night. I noticed immediately, which annoyed me more than his absence should have. His chair was empty. The bond was quiet enough that I knew he was somewhere far from the room, but not far enough that I could pretend I didn't feel him at all. I ate half my meal, gave up on the rest, and told myself I was relieved. That was the lie I carried with me until I found him later standing alone beneath the high windows at the end of the western hall. He was looking out into the dark, one hand resting against the stone frame, his posture too still. I almost turned around. Then the bond tightened softly beneath my ribs. Kael looked over his shoulder. You came looking for me. The old words would have sounded like proof. This time they sounded like a question he was afraid to ask directly. You weren't at dinner. I wasn't hungry. That excuse is getting repetitive. The corner of his mouth moved, but not enough to become a smile. I stopped several feet away. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Part of me wanted him to say something arrogant so I could return to familiar ground. Instead, he looked tired in the same quiet way he had before, except now I knew enough to see the difference between exhaustion and control. About last night, he said. You don't have to apologize for being disappointed. His gaze sharpened. I wasn't going to apologize for that. Good. I was going to apologize for assuming your affection had only one possible ending. That caught me off guard. Kael looked back toward the windows. I still don't understand it, he continued. But I understand that I was wrong to call it inevitable. The bond warmed between us, and for once neither of us reacted to it. That's different, I said. From what? From admitting I have a right to choose. He was quiet for so long that I thought he might disagree. I think, he said finally, I have spent a very long time believing those were the same thing. I frowned. Believing what were the same thing? Being bonded to someone and being chosen by them. There was no confidence in his voice now. No certainty. Just careful honesty. I stayed where I was. Why? Kael's hand tightened slightly against the stone. Because the alternative is worse. Worse than what? He gave a short breath that held no humor. Than being refused. The answer was simple enough that I almost missed what it meant. Then the pieces from the last few days shifted into a new shape. The way he had treated every sign of care as evidence. The way his hope had collapsed when I told him affection could exist without commitment. The way he kept trying to turn feeling into certainty, not because certainty made him powerful, but because uncertainty left him exposed. You thought the bond made rejection impossible, I said. Kael did not answer immediately. I thought it made rejection temporary. There it was. Not possession. Not exactly. Fear dressed as certainty. I felt something inside me resist the conclusion because understanding him felt dangerous in a different way. If Kael was simply controlling, I knew what to do. I resisted. I withdrew. I protected the line between us. But if the control came from fear, then resistance alone would never solve the real problem. So every time I cared, I said slowly, you treated it like proof because you needed it to mean I was moving toward you. His jaw tightened. Yes. Not because you wanted obedience. He looked at me then. I have never wanted your obedience. I almost laughed. You have a strange way of showing that. I know. No defense. No correction. Just the admission. That mattered more than I wanted it to. Kael stepped away from the window, but did not come closer. Do you know what the bond felt like to me when it first formed? He asked. I shook my head. Relief. The word surprised me. Not triumph. No, his eyes stayed on mine. Relief that I would never have to wonder. Something in my chest tightened. Wonder what? Kael's expression changed, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw him hesitate before saying something because the answer itself cost him. Whether someone could know me completely and still decide I was not the person they wanted. The bond pulsed once between us. I had expected power to be the center of him. I had expected pride. Maybe loneliness, eventually. I had not expected this. A man who had taken certainty from a supernatural bond because asking to be chosen freely meant risking an answer he could not control. Kael, I said quietly, understanding that doesn't make what you did okay. I know. It doesn't mean I owe you reassurance. I know. And it doesn't mean I'm going to promise you the answer you want. His face tightened at that, but he nodded. I know. 3 times. The same words. 3 completely different costs. I realized then that the conflict between us had changed. I was no longer trying to convince Kael that I possessed a choice. He understood that now. The question was whether he could live with it. Whether he could want me without turning every kindness into evidence. Whether he could let affection remain uncertain instead of forcing it toward the ending he needed. What happens now? I asked. Kael looked at me for a long moment. I don't know. I had never heard him say those words before. Strangely, they made me trust him more than any declaration could have. Then maybe start there, I said, with not knowing. His gaze dropped briefly, then returned to mine. You make that sound simple. It isn't. No, the faintest hint of a smile touched his face, but this one held no certainty. I am beginning to understand that. I should have left then. Instead, I stayed beside him in the quiet hall, not close enough to touch, not far enough to pretend the bond between us meant nothing. For once, neither of us tried to decide what the moment promised. And that small difference changed the direction of everything. Before, I had been asking whether Kael would ever understand that the bond could not choose for me. Now I had my answer. He understood. What I did not know, and what suddenly mattered far more, was whether understanding would change anything when respecting my freedom finally cost him something he could not get back. After that night, the strangest thing happened between Kael and me. Nothing dramatic changed. He did not suddenly become gentle. I did not suddenly trust him. The bond did not soften, weaken, or offer us some convenient new answer. What changed was simpler and harder to ignore. Kael began leaving decisions unfinished until I made them. The first time I noticed, he was waiting outside the reading room. I was going to the southern terrace, he said. Then he stopped. Before, he would have added, come with me, with the quiet confidence of someone already expecting yes. This time he simply waited. Are you asking me? I said. His mouth tightened. I am trying to. Then ask. A small pause. Would you like to come? I studied him. The bond warmed, familiar and immediate. A week earlier, I would have refused just to protect the meaning of refusal. Now I realized that would still make the bond responsible for my answer, only in the opposite direction. Yes, I said. Kael's eyes shifted toward me. I saw hope rise, and then watched him deliberately do nothing with it. No smile that claimed victory. No remark about progress. All right, he said. That was all. We walked together. On the terrace. Kael let the space between us remain undefined. When I moved closer, he did not treat proximity as permission. When I asked what the bond told him I was thinking, I saw the old temptation cross his face. Then he shook his head. You tell me. I asked if not knowing what everything meant was difficult for him. Yes. Does it make you want to go back to the way things were? Sometimes. He looked out across the darkening sky. But wanting certainty does not make me entitled to it. For the first time, I laughed without bracing for consequence. The bond warmed sharply. Kael did nothing with it. That restraint did something dangerous to me. It made trust possible. Not complete trust. Not forgiveness. But enough that I no longer left simply because staying might be misunderstood. Over the next few days, that became our new rhythm. Sometimes I chose closeness, sometimes I did not, and Kael stopped turning either answer into evidence. I began to see how much of my distance had been defensive. When warmth was no longer taken from me and renamed, every answer no longer had to be no. One evening, I found Kael in the same reading room where everything between us had first become unbearable. He was sitting beside the dying fire, the chair opposite him empty. He looked up when I entered, but did not invite me to sit. I crossed the room and took the chair anyway. His expression softened. He said nothing. You can say you're glad I stayed, I told him. I am glad you stayed. See? That wasn't fatal. Give it time. I smiled despite myself. Then Kael's expression changed. Elias. What? I need to ask you something. The carefulness in his voice made me still. Ask. If I do everything correctly now, he paused, as if already hearing the mistake in the question. If I respect every choice you make, if I stop assuming what the bond means for your future, does that make it more likely that you'll choose me? There it was. Not the old certainty, but something more vulnerable. He was no longer demanding an answer. He was searching for a reward. I wanted to comfort him, but if I promised that respect would earn him love, freedom would become another transaction. So I answered carefully. It makes it possible for me to trust you. Kael waited. That isn't what I asked. I know. His eyes dropped. So you still don't know? No, the disappointment was immediate. But this time he did not hide behind the bond. He just sat with it. And if the answer is never? He asked. My chest tightened. We had reached the question beneath everything, but not yet the moment when either of us could answer it completely. Then respecting me still has to matter, I said. Kael looked at me for a long time. Even if I get nothing from it. Especially then. The fire shifted softly between us. I expected him to pull away. Instead, Kael leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the disappointment was still there. So was the restraint. I don't like that answer, he said. I know, but I understand it. That mattered. I stayed until the fire burned low, but as I left, another truth followed me into the corridor. Kael had proven he could surrender small certainties and respect an answer when the cost was discomfort. What neither of us knew was whether any of that would survive the only test that truly mattered. What he would do when respecting my freedom meant accepting that I might leave him for good. The question followed me for 3 days. What would Kael do if respecting my freedom meant losing me completely? By the third evening, a small travel bag was packed beside my bedroom door, and I had arranged for the southern gate to be opened at dawn. The decision had stopped being theoretical. Kael had learned to ask instead of assume and to hear, I don't know, without turning it into not yet. But none of those lessons had cost him what he was most afraid to lose. Me. So when I found him in the western hall, beside the same tall windows where he had first admitted the bond had felt like relief, I did not ask whether he wanted company. I walked to the window beside him and said, I need to leave. Kael did not move. The bond reacted before either of us did, tightening beneath my ribs with enough force to make me inhale sharply. His hand closed around the stone ledge. For how long? That was exactly why I had come. I don't know. The silence after those words felt different from every silence we had shared before. There was no misunderstanding left to hide behind. Kael knew what I meant. You want distance from me. I need to know what my choices feel like when I'm not making them inside your certainty. His jaw tightened. I thought we had changed that. We have. I turned toward him. That's why I can finally ask for this. He looked at me then, and the hurt on his face was so immediate that I almost softened the sentence. Almost. If nothing had changed, I continued, I would only be trying to escape you. I'm not. Then why leave? Because staying has become easier. Kael stared at me. That makes no sense. It does to me. I struggled for the cleanest truth. Before, every day I stayed felt like resistance. I knew what I was doing because I was fighting your assumption. Now you've stopped making the choice for me, and I need to know what I choose when there's nothing left to fight. Something in his expression changed. Not anger. Fear. I saw it before he could bury it. And if you discover that you prefer being away from me, there it was. The question beneath every other question. I could have lied. I could have promised a week, called this only space, or guaranteed another chance. But if I gave him certainty just because I could not bear to watch him hurt, nothing between us would really have changed. I would simply be the one handing it to him. I said. His face went still. The bond pulled tight between us. Elias, you asked, and you could have said you would return. I could have, but you won't. I shook my head. Not if I don't know. Kael turned away from me and looked through the window. His reflection floated faintly in the dark glass, rigid and pale. You said respecting you had to matter even if I got nothing from it. Yes. I didn't think you meant this soon. There was no accusation in the words. That somehow hurt more. I stepped closer, then stopped myself before closeness became comfort I could not honestly explain. Neither did I. Kael laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. You know what is cruel about this? What? If you had asked me months ago, I would have told you no. He finally looked at me. I would have said the bond made leaving pointless. That you would return eventually, so there was no reason to pretend otherwise. I said nothing. Now I know better. His voice dropped. And knowing better is worse. Because you know I might not come back. Yes. The honesty between us had become almost unbearable. Yet for the first time, neither of us was using the bond to soften it. I moved my hand to the place beneath my wrist where its warmth always seemed strongest. Kael, I care about you. His eyes closed for half a second. Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it. Then stay. The words came out before he could stop them. He opened his eyes, and I watched him hear himself. He did not take the request back. He also did not turn it into a command. I want you to stay, he said again, quieter this time. I know. I want you to choose me. I know. And you care about me. Yes. His expression tightened. But you still can't promise you will. No, for a moment. Everything we had built seemed to narrow into that single answer. Kael could no longer tell himself I felt nothing, and I could no longer tell myself he only wanted possession. The bond, the affection, and his change were all real. None of them could manufacture the answer he wanted most. Kael stepped closer, stopping well before he reached me. If I let you leave, he said, and you never return, what am I supposed to do with this? His hand touched his own bond mark. I looked at it, then at him. I don't know. Pain crossed his face. You've become very fond of that answer. Because sometimes it's the honest one. He lowered his hand. And honesty is supposed to make this better? No, I swallowed. It's supposed to make it real. That silenced him. I realized then that this was the point we could not walk backward from. If I stayed now just to protect Kael from uncertainty, I would betray the freedom I had spent all this time asking him to respect. If he stopped me now, every small act of restraint he had practiced would become meaningless the moment the cost became real. There was no safe compromise left. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. Kael's breathing changed, barely. Tomorrow. Yes. And you will not tell me when you're coming back. Because I don't know if I am. The bond flared so sharply that both of us went still. Kael looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not certainty. Not possession. Not even hope. Grief, perhaps, but grief before the loss had happened. Grief for the fact that the decision was finally his. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to tell him that everything would be fine. Instead, I stood where I was and let the truth remain between us without rescuing either of us from it. Kael had proven he could respect my freedom when it cost him comfort. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether he could respect it when the price was me. And for the first time since our bond began, neither of us had any idea what he would choose. Kael was waiting for me when I came downstairs the next morning. He stood near the open doors at the end of the hall, dressed exactly as he always was, composed enough that someone who did not know him might have mistaken stillness for calm. I knew better now. The bond between us felt tight and awake, every step I took toward him answering somewhere beneath my ribs. My bag was light. That mattered to me. I was not leaving with everything I owned. I was not making a performance of departure. I was simply leaving because I had said I would, and because if my freedom only existed when I had no desire to stay, then it was not freedom at all. Kael looked at the bag, then at me. You're really going? It was not a question. Yes. His jaw tightened. I stopped several feet away. This was the distance we had learned over the past weeks. Close enough to speak honestly. Far enough that neither of us could pretend closeness itself was an answer. I didn't sleep, he said. Neither did I. I kept thinking there had to be another way. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. Another way to do what? Let you choose without having to watch you leave. The honesty of it hurt. I could have softened the moment. I could have reminded him that I cared. I could have said maybe. Soon. Probably. Anything that would turn the edge of this into something safer. Instead, I asked, did you find one? Kael gave a small, humorless laugh. No, for a few seconds. Neither of us moved. Then he stepped toward me. Only one step. The bond surged warm enough that my breath caught. Kael noticed. Of course he did. Months ago, that reaction would have been enough for him. Proof. Promise. Destiny answering on my behalf. Now he simply looked at me. Tell me to stay, I said quietly. His expression broke for half a second. What? If that's what you want, say it. You know that's what I want. I do. Then why make me say it? Because I need to know what happens after. Kael stared at me. Slowly, painfully, he understood. This was not a test of whether he wanted me. We had passed that question a long time ago. It was not even a test of whether I cared about him. I had stopped lying to myself about that too. This was the question beneath every argument, every boundary, every quiet evening when he had learned not to turn affection into ownership. What did Kael do when wanting me and respecting me finally pointed in opposite directions? His voice dropped. Stay. The word was barely above a whisper. My chest tightened. I want you here, he continued. I want tomorrow with you. And the day after that. I want every stupid cup of tea you leave untouched because you get distracted. I want you arguing with me when I assume too much. I want to hear you laugh and not wonder whether I'm allowed to hope because of it. His eyes shone, but he did not look away. I want you to choose me. I swallowed. I know. Then stay. Every part of me that had once survived by resisting him wanted to retreat into something simple. No. Never. You don't own me. Those answers had protected me when Kael believed the bond had already decided everything. But they were not honest anymore. So I gave him the truth that cost me too. Part of me wants to. Kael closed his eyes. The bond flared between us. When he opened them again, hope was there. Raw and immediate. And this time I did not punish him for feeling it. But I'm still leaving, I said. The hope did not disappear. It changed into pain. Why? Because if I stay today only because losing you hurts, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering whether I chose you or just chose the easier pain. Kael's face went still. And if leaving tells you that you never want to return, then that has to be allowed to be true. The words shook on the way out. I hated them. I meant them. Kael looked toward the open doors behind me. Morning light stretched across the floor between us. Nothing physically blocked my path. Nothing ever really had. That was what made this harder. The thing that had kept me trapped was not a locked door. It was Kael's conviction that crossing it could only be temporary. I could ask you not to go, he said. Yes. I could tell you the bond will bring you back. You could. I could believe that again. I know. His breathing changed. It would hurt less. I did not answer. Kael looked at me then with an expression I would remember long after everything else blurred. He looked like a man standing in front of the only thing he could not conquer without destroying its value. Slowly, he lifted his hand toward me. He stopped before touching my face. Waited. I nodded. His fingertips rested against my cheek. The contact sent a warm ache through the bond, so familiar now that I no longer confused the feeling with instruction. Elias, he whispered, if I let you go, I don't know what happens to us. Neither do I. His thumb moved once against my skin. I hate that answer. A broken laugh escaped me. I know. And you still won't promise to come back. No, the word hurt both of us. That was why it mattered. Kael lowered his hand. For one terrible second, nothing happened. He stood there with all the power he had always possessed, all the fear he had finally admitted, and every reason in the world to turn uncertainty back into control. Then something in him settled. Not relief. Acceptance. All right, he said. I could barely hear him. Kael, no, his voice was gentle now. If I ask one more question, I'll only be looking for another way to make the answer safe. The bond tightened painfully. He felt it too. His hand curled once at his side, then opened. Go, Elias. My throat closed. I had imagined hearing those words so many times. In every version, they had sounded like victory. Instead, They felt like grief. You mean that? I don't want to. He looked directly at me. But yes. I waited for him to add something. A condition. A deadline. A promise that the bond would return me to him eventually. He didn't. What if I don't come back? I asked, because some wounded part of me still needed to know whether his freedom had an invisible edge. Kael's face tightened. Then I will have to live with having loved someone who was free enough to leave me. My eyes burned. Neither of us moved. Then Kael did the one thing I had never expected from him. He turned around. Not in anger. Not to dismiss me. He turned his back because he knew if he kept watching, he might ask me to stay again. He faced the dark interior of the hall and left the open doors behind him. Left them to me. The demon lord who had once believed our bond had already chosen my future stood perfectly still and refused to watch that future walk away. I stepped toward the doors. The bond pulled. My heart pulled harder. Kael did not turn around. I crossed the threshold. One step, then another. No command followed me. No certainty reached after me. No voice promised I would return. By the time I reached the sunlight, I understood the immediate truth of what he had done. Kael had not stopped loving me. He had stopped using love as evidence that I belonged to him. For the first time since our bond began, I could leave without proving him wrong and stay without proving him right. The choice was mine. And somehow, only after he finally let me go did I begin to understand what choosing him might actually mean. I kept walking until the doors were far enough behind me that I could no longer hear the quiet of the hall. The bond stayed warm beneath my skin, but it did not pull me backward or tell me what to do. For the first time, it felt like a connection instead of a command. Freedom was not lighter than I expected. It hurt. I missed Kael before I had gone far enough to call it missing, but the ache was mine, and no one was naming it for me. So I kept going. I needed distance that was real, and I needed to know he would not follow. He did not. By evening, I understood the first consequence of what Kael had done. There was no enemy left for me to resist. For so long I had measured freedom by how firmly I could say no because Kael turned "I don't know" into eventually yes. Without his certainty pressing against me, I could finally admit the truth I had armored myself against. I did not know what I wanted. That night, I let myself think of him without treating the thought as surrender. Kael learning to ask, swallowing disappointment, turning his back because letting me leave mattered more than watching me go. The next morning, I still did not return. I stayed away long enough to know the bond would not drag me home, and Kael would not send for me. Long enough for the question to change. I was no longer asking whether I could leave him. I had already done that. I was asking whether, now that I truly could, I wanted the distance to remain. When I finally turned back, it was not because the bond pulled harder. It didn't. That was the strangest and most beautiful part. Nothing supernatural forced the decision. I simply thought of Kael sitting beside a dying fire, trying not to turn every kindness into a promise. I thought of the way he had said, "I don't know," and how much more trustworthy that uncertainty had felt than all his old confidence. I thought of the open doors behind him when he turned away. Then I made a choice. My choice. Kael was in the western hall when I returned. For one suspended second, the sight of him there felt so familiar that I almost laughed. The same tall windows. The same quiet stone. The same man who had once stood in that place and told me the bond had already decided our future. But he was not looking toward the entrance as if he had expected me. His back was to me. He was reading something by the window, unaware I had crossed the hall until the bond warmed between us. He froze. Slowly, he lowered the pages in his hand. He did not turn immediately. That was how I knew he had changed. The old Kael would have known what my return meant before I spoke. This Kael waited. "You can turn around," I said. He did. Hope appeared in his face so quickly it almost broke me. Then he controlled nothing about it except what he did next. He stayed where he was. Elias. Just my name. No claim attached. "I came back," I said. His eyes searched mine. "I can see that." I smiled faintly. "You're not going to ask what it means?" The question hurt him. I saw that. But he shook his head. "Not unless you want to tell me." That was the final proof I had not known I needed. Not the bond. Not his grief. Not even the fact that he had let me leave. This. He had wanted an answer more than anything. And now that I stood in front of him carrying one, he refused to take it before I offered it. I crossed the distance between us myself. Kael's breath caught, but he did not move to meet me. "I don't know what happens after today," I said. "I know. I'm not promising forever. Pain and relief moved across his face at the same time. I know, but I wanted to come back. His eyes closed, just for a moment. When they opened again, the certainty that used to frighten me was gone. In its place was something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. Wonder. Then I'm glad you did. I reached for his hand. Kael looked down as our fingers met, and the bond warmed between us. Once, that warmth had felt like evidence being used against me. Now it meant nothing beyond what I chose to give it. So I tightened my fingers around his. Not because fate had already answered for us. Not because the bond demanded it. Not because Kael had waited long enough to deserve me. I did it because I wanted to. He looked at me, and for the first time, neither of us tried to turn that moment into a promise about the next one. The demon lord had once believed our bond made my choice inevitable. In the end, it was only after he turned away and truly let me go that I became free enough to discover what the bond had never been able to tell either of us. Being connected was fate. Staying had to be a choice.